Welcome back to You Must Be Woking, the podcast where we have honest and sometimes tough conversations on the topic of diversity and inclusion. With her, Dawn Hurst.
And him, Craig Richards.
Hello, welcome back. In today's episode, we're exploring the topic of speak up in the workplace. Why is bullying, harassment and sexual harassment still a major issue at work? Why do people stand by and watch as major incidents or scandals occur and only ever seem to come forward after the event? And importantly, what can leaders do to lean in to a speak up culture to change these things in the workplace? How you doing? Welcome back.
Thank you.
How's it going?
All good, all good.
Looking very bright today in red.
know.
Loving that. So it's me and my bright yellow.
It's all about colour.
Sunshine yellow today.
Love that. Yeah. No, all good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good. Thank you. I'm really good. I'm a bit tired. I went to an event last night, which is interesting because today's episode is about Speak Up. And last night I went to an event held by the Free Speech Union.
Ooh.
They were celebrating 5 years of being the union, the Free Speech Union. So yeah, it was interesting. Some interesting characters at the event, I should say. It was quite a fascinating evening. When you're kind of at an event like that and you bump into different people and you're chatting to different people throughout the evening, and should we say a couple of characters that I chatted to the other night, I was thinking, I'm not sure I agree with that, and I'm not sure I agree with them. And then I had to remind myself, you're at an event for free speech, Craig, right? The whole point of this is that people can disagree with each other, but the principle is we agree that they have the right to say what they want to say. And I think that's the kind of key bit. But it was really interesting. I actually met quite a few people who had won cases, interestingly, that were related to topics like the ones we talk about, diversity and inclusion-based topics. So you never know. In the future, we might be able to get one of those individuals on as a guest to come and talk about that. That'd be fun, right?
Yeah, please come.
Yeah. So so it was a really good event. Something I'm proud to support the Free Speech Union as well. I think they take a very similar view to us in terms of speech. We don't all have to get along. We don't all have to agree, but we do have to respect the fact that people have the right to say some things that we might not agree with. So all good, but you never know. We might get one or two of these guests on in the future. That'd be fun. Okay, should we get into it? Let's do it. So as always, we're going to start the show with a news article. And one that we found this week is from the Irish Times. And it's an article that says, men are more likely than women to speak up over ethical concerns in the workplace. This was a survey that was held. And it also says that an older cohort are more likely to think there's no point in raising issues around misconduct. An interesting stat. And that men are more likely to speak up over ethical concerns than women. So they were the two big things coming out of it. So I'll read just a little bit more to give us a bit more context. So according to the Irish results of the research by the Ethics at Work 2024 International Survey of Employees, released by the Institute of Business Ethics with the Compliance Institute. That was a mouthful. Some 76% of men said they would speak up if there was illegal or ethical misconduct. And this was compared to only 53% of women said they would speak up. I thought it was really interesting. The chief executive of the Compliance Institute, Michael Kavanagh, said the gender split between people speaking about ethical concerns or problems in the workplace was the most concerning aspect of the data released on Tuesday. It is worrying that women are much more reticent than men about speaking up in the workplace, and that women are more inclined to think they could lose their job or be dismissed as troublemakers for doing so. I thought that was really interesting and a nice way to kick off this episode, really, because you and I are very passionate about this topic, aren't we? So
yeah,
should we? What's your reactions to that article?
Relatively unsurprised.
Really?
I think that it would be interesting to see who has, not who would.
That's quite interesting.
Because that's not what the statistics are saying.
Okay. That's quite an interesting way to look at that. Obviously, you've flummoxed me now, because I thought, actually, when I read the results, I was thinking, that surprises me. I would have thought more women would have been likely to speak up than men. Actually, I thought men would have just gone, oh, it is what it is. It's just a workplace. But actually, you've just spun that on his head, because what you're saying is would, not have. Okay. Well, I'm going to ring Mr. Cav. What was his name? Mr. Kavanagh. I'm going to tell him. The survey should have asked who has, not who would.
So I've got a bit of
spinning me on my heels before we've even started.
So I did a very rough bit of primary research yesterday. I'd got a professional services client that I was working with, and I'd got a room full of people, and I gave them 3 options as to how would they speak up, and these were all female. So the first one was I wouldn't.
Okay.
The second option was I would talk to a friend or a trusted colleague. And the third one was I'd do the formal HR route.
Okay.
And the first 2 scored the highest. And this is an environment where the culture is actually pretty good.
Okay.
So
it's interesting.
It was very interesting. So this topic for me has dominated my career, to be honest, because I, as you know, tend to get involved in crisis culture work. And that means organisations who are on the front of the paper for all the wrong reasons. And we've worked together on some pretty heavy cases over the years. And I'm talking about criminal activity, significant sexual assault of all kinds, criminal behaviour in terms of pornographic use, in terms of significant assault cases, corporate manslaughter, those kinds of things, the real upper end of the scale. And there's a common theme, sadly, whether it be the simplest of speak-up cases through to the most complex, and that's fear.
Yeah.
And until an individual can feel confident and comfortable for the reasons that you're talking about in the research, that they might be cast aside, or they might be treated differently, or worse.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? We will come back to this in a minute, but it's one of the questions. So just sticking on the theme of our podcast, come on, Craig, ask the difficult questions that people would ask. And I'm going to say this, and I want to just put a bit of a caveat to this and say, look, for anybody that's been a victim of this is not a criticism, this is not a critique, but it is a question that a lot of people want to ask. Why do people only come forward 10 years after the event? Or why do people only come forward? And it's all easy to say now, isn't it? It was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But actually, there is some real reasons why people don't come forward at the time, isn't it? And it is steeped in what you just talked about, which is fear often, right? So when they do come forward, it's usually because someone else has broken the mold, so they feel confident they've got a bit of air cover, or they're very secure in their own lives now, 10 years later, and actually they don't mind speaking up now because they're quite confident that they won't have a backlash as a result of it. And a lot of the reason that people do speak up later is for that. It's steeped in fear, right?
Absolutely. And don't just assume that that's junior or people earlier in their career, because, I'm handling cases right now that are very, very senior board level individuals who are on the receiving end of criminal behaviour who will not speak up.
Yeah.
And, there has to be certain conditions. And you're right, in some cases that can take 10, 20 years to create.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite scary, isn't it, when, these things kind of, these kick in. And I guess it kind of leans me in a little bit to some of the more recent press stories around some of this stuff as well. So in the last 2 weeks or the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've seen some significant press coverage around some big speak up cases. So only today, and we've seen in the newspaper the tragic story of the soldier. I can't remember her name. Sorry, Jaisley Beck. Apologies. Really tragic story about this. Jaisley Beck was a soldier who hung herself as a result of being the victim of a quite a significant sexual assault within the organization. And only today, I mean, this happened a few years ago, it was in 2021, but only today the coroner has ruled that the way the army handled that case was a contributing factor to her death. And, that's quite significant for any organization to be accused that way, in that way, after the event, but particularly for something with such a tragic ending to that story. I mean, it's quite sad, and for everybody involved in that, right? It's particularly her family, and just awful case. But
it is, and I don't think we should delve into the detail of the case, but there were at least 6 red flags in that case.
Yeah,
and that's a common theme in the really complex cases. Multiple red flags. Somebody knew. Somebody went, well, it's just Bob. Somebody is unsurprised by the behaviour.
Yeah. And so I don't want to spend too much time on Jaisley's case, because it's a really tragic case in particular. But there are a couple of other ones that have gone on recently as well. So Rubiales today, who's the ex-head of the Spanish Football Association, was accused a couple of years ago of sexual misconduct when he kissed one of the women footballers during a celebration event, and she complained about it, and he's been found guilty of that assault today. Not found guilty of the later charge of coercion, but was found guilty of the assault bit. And then Gino De Campo, who's a celebrity chef in the UK, has been accused of misconduct, both bullying behaviour, inappropriate behaviour, but also sexual inappropriate behaviour in the workplace, under the ITV TV channel here in the UK as well. So again, 3 big cases reported just in the last couple of days.
And those are the ones that hit the headlines. I'd love to say, oh yeah, this was 20 years ago. The reality is, I cannot quantify this statement, but the reality is I'm handling more cases now in my career than I have ever handled.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I mean, you and I work a lot on these things together. We get quite a lot of cases that come across our desk from employers who say, oh, we're debating whether to go to court about this case or fight this case, and they come across our desk and we have to read them and review how would we judge on them, or what do we think an employment tribunal would judge them as. And a lot of the times we're sending them back to the employers and saying, I'm sorry, you're going to lose this case because you haven't done the things right that we would expect to see in response to some of this stuff. And usually it's down to process being wrong and all of that kind of stuff, or they haven't done the training to protect people. It's interesting. A couple of days ago, somebody asked me about a previous episode where I'd called out the BBC and said, I'm sorry, BBC, not acceptable, blah, blah, blah. I blame the BBC for some of the incidents that have happened with their stars. And they said to me, well, how would you fix it then? And my response was quite bold. And I said, I could fix the problem with this at the BBC overnight. I could literally fix it overnight. I would just link it to the chief executive's pay, right? He's a public servant. And every time an incident like this happened, I'd take 25% of his pay and watch how quick it changes then. Right, genuinely watch how quick it changes. They'd have processes in place. They'd have, training in place overnight, wouldn't they, if it was linked to the pay?
Yeah, I take your sentiment. I think,
but it would, wouldn't it? Right?
Yeah.
Because this has been going on for a long time at the BBC, and we've had endless amounts of these kind of things happen. And we sit here every time, and I slag them off every time and say, come on, BBC, pull your finger out. You're a public sector organisation. Put the training in place. Do this, that, and the other. Nothing changes. We'll have another one in a few months' time, no doubt. But if you linked it straight to the executive's pay and said, for every time this happens now, or the culture secretary, Lisa and Andy, steal my idea, put it in place, tell Tim Davey, if he doesn't get the grip of this, you'll take his pay away. Watch how quick it changes.
Yeah. And at the same time, let's have dinner with the victims.
Yeah.
Because I think, we mustn't forget what Speak Up is there to do.
Yeah.
And, whatever interventions we recommend, and there are many that are very robust, this is the impact on people's lives. And, the impact of the cases that you've just read are, literally life-ending. And that's happening in the corporate world as well every day.
Every day.
And we shouldn't forget that this is having emotional impact, financial impact. It's destroying families. It is destroying careers, both ways. And we must not forget that that's what's at the root of this whole topic.
I guess the other thing we should remember, though, is that speak up isn't just about inappropriate behavior or bullying, harassment, that kind of behavior. It can be about, other inappropriate actions within an organization as well, right? So misconduct or integrity issues, ethical concerns.
Absolutely.
Speak up covers quite a broad range, doesn't it?
It does, and it's not always negative.
No.
Speak up can be hugely positive. I've got an idea that can improve the business. I've got a new product idea. Yeah. I can think of something that would continuously improve what we do. Definitely, speak up is a huge topic. But I think for the purposes of when we talk about EDI, we tend to focus on the spectrum of behavioural cases.
Yeah, and I guess part of I have a bit of a niggling concern about speak up more widely in the sense of, with everything that's going on in the media at the moment about DEI rollbacks and DEI dead and all of that kind of stuff, right? Lovely sentiment, some of which we agree with, some of which we don't. What I'm really nervous about, though, is that the pendulum doesn't swing too far back the other way, that we go back to a workplace of the 70s, 80s, where it was really inappropriate for women or really inappropriate for people of color, or behaviors go back to a time when, it was common for... I have stories of people that I've spoken to where women would come into work at the weekend to move their desks around so they could sit with their backs to the wall so that their boss didn't rub himself against them when he was stood behind them looking at their monitor and stuff. How awful would it be if we go back to that time because we're rolling back?
But I think we have to think about what lens we're looking at that through, because culturally around the world, there are different levels of acceptance.
Of course.
And, the behaviour that we recognise in the UK from the 70s is still the benchmark for some countries.
Yeah, quite. And there are obviously cultural differences. So even in places like in the Middle East, for example, women don't get the same rights as men, and they don't have the same opportunities and things as well. So yeah, it's a good point. We don't make that. But actually, when we talk about speak up more widely, we need to think about it through a slightly different lens. And I guess when I ask myself why people don't speak up about these behavioral concerns or ethical concerns or, conduct concerns, it usually comes down to fear that we've talked about. So what the fear is steeped in what's going to happen to me if I speak up, right? In the first instance, so what will happen to me? Will I have negative consequences? Will I be seen as a disruptor? Will they try and get rid of me for speaking up? The second thing, though, is about the unknown. And this is the bit that I talk to clients about quite a lot, is when I ring that number, who's going to pick up the phone? And then what happens next? What's the chain of events that will likely happen as a result of me speaking up, either confidentially? Or what will happen if I tell my manager about something? Or what will happen if I challenge that person? And because people, often what we see in organizations is they tell people, here's the number, right? Call this number if you want to be a whistleblower, or email this confidential line. What we don't do is help them understand the chain of events that will happen as a result of them speaking up. And therefore, because we're human and we don't like the unknown and we don't like the uncomfortable, we don't engage with it, right? It's because we don't know what the chain of events is likely to be next.
Yeah. And this comes back to what I was saying. So what we do instead is we either do nothing and we let it go and we make ourselves ill mentally or whatever that is, or we talk informally to a family member or a colleague who, depending on their stance, will either encourage or discourage. And we lose at each stage of this the opportunity to do something about this topic. And therefore, it goes from being a small misdemeanor to going unchecked and then turning into a serious situation.
5 years later, ends up on the front page of the newspaper because X star had done something, somebody did speak up, and then I go, oh, actually, yeah, that happened to me 5 years ago as well. I saw that as well 5 years ago. And because I'm not working there anymore, I'm not linked with that star anymore, I feel much more comfortable to talk about it. And
Precisely.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's fascinating.
And it snowballs. And, you look at some of these cases you're referring to. We're not talking a couple. We're talking hundreds of people who have gone, yeah, Bob did that to me too. And, we all know a Bob.
Yeah, well, we do. Well, unfortunately, we know too many Bobs. Okay. Any other bits then around the kind of speak up? What are the challenges that organizations face with speak up cultures? Because I guess we've talked about this in a previous episode about the Netflix culture is very much built on speak up. And we also say to people, that's quite hard to achieve. It's not something that you can just do easily, is it? But, what are some of the barriers, do you think, for organizations to consider when it comes to their kind of speak up culture?
So remove the emotional ones for a moment, because I think we need to focus on the mechanics. So often we don't allow people to speak up anonymously. Therefore, all of those things come back into play. Yeah. The second is, as you say, process is unclear. The mechanism is too complicated. The person that is on the end of that call or email, they don't trust, or turns out to be a friend of somebody else in the business. And they have heard poor stories from other colleagues of their experience. So therefore, they're hugely skeptical of it. Also, seasoned professionals can also have a different level of what they consider inappropriate and not.
Yeah.
So seasoned, respected professionals can go, oh, well, suck it up.
Yeah.
Whereas actually the line for the individual is in a different place. Yeah. So there can be a huge reluctance of being dismissed, not dismissed from the role, being dismissive of the situation.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we've done lots of work with many organizations around the world. And one of the things we look at when we do kind of the ROI as an example, and we're measuring the work that they do to give them a kind of return for the work that they're doing, we look at the speak up process, don't we? And what we try and do every time we look at the speak up process is follow it. And so we try and act with it of how they use it. And I always laugh about this because whenever I'm working with other clients and they say to me, oh, we're having this really problematic relationship. We're trying to get these customers to use this form and do things this way. And I go, right, okay, have you ever used it yourself? And they go, what? No, well, why would we need to use it? And I'm like, maybe you should walk the customer path for a second, and then you might find out why they don't want to use the form you want them to use, right? So we do it when we go into organizations. We pull the thread and we go down the road of trying to use whatever speak up process that is in place. And I'm always amazed by the different results that we get that aren't either what's advertised on the tin in the first place, or there's been multiple processes created in order to kind of circumvent the existing processes. And like, this is quite common. And some of the times there's no malice in that, right? I genuinely think it's just been a case of people have added processes and it's just confused the overall process and we've got a problem. But some of the time, there is malice in that. People are deliberately subverting a process because they know there's a problem and they're trying to protect themselves or their colleagues from the consequences of that process.
Precisely. I love it when you've got a large group corporate company who, when you're doing your investigation, walk you through this beautiful process that you cannot make one comment about. And then you pull the thread locally in one of the sites and it unravels immediately because somebody's introduced, suddenly all of the things get sidelined over here and suddenly we've got an individual who's mates with somebody else receiving the questions. Or, as we have done, we've found several thousand complaints sidelined somewhere.
Nobody knew they existed because some process somewhere siphoned them off into a database that nobody was checking. And you're like, oh my God.
Love that.
And again, I repeat this because actually 99.9% of the time, there's usually no malice in that. It's just because as an organization, you haven't walked that customer path, right? Yes. You haven't actually tried to use the process in the first place, which means why would you know that it doesn't work, right? Why would you know? And you haven't kind of tested it regularly to check that it does still work and that it is appropriate for use in the modern day or whatever reason that is. And it's always a bit fascinating when we do that kind of stuff. But there are the odd 0.1% of the time when processes have been deliberately subverted. Yeah. And it's usually because someone somewhere knows there's an issue.
Yes.
Right. And they either think to themselves, I can fix it, or I'll sort it, and then don't.
Yeah.
And then get found out. And that's really sad too, because actually as colleagues, we should be committed to just being good colleagues and supporting each other, right?
And I think, these things don't get undiscovered. And that's where careers are ruined, through credibility and people hearing whispers, and then suddenly trust is eroded and it turns into a much bigger issue often than the original issue.
And I find it fascinating because obviously we're still talking a little bit about, or we're leaning into the kind of behavioural stuff, but actually there's been some major scandals or crises that have happened in governments or in corporations around the world, which could have been avoided had someone spoken up. Because inevitably after the event, people go, oh yeah, I knew about that, or I saw that. Absolutely. I've seen that loads of times. Why didn't you speak up? Oh, I didn't want to, or I didn't. And so had you have spoken up, you could have saved your company billions, or you could have saved the economy billions, or, whatever it is.
But I think that bystander piece is a really difficult position in Speak Up, isn't it? We always say January is our biggest month in the UK for
because it is
cases,
the biggest month for cases.
Post-Christmas party and every connotation you can think of what's gone on at a Christmas party. But I also, I recall a very, very difficult case which was centred around a Christmas party, and some very credible, ethical, senior leaders, mature male, who had very strong ethics as to what was and wasn't, were deeply affected by some of the cases and what had happened as a result of them not saying, is everything okay? And we need to be mindful that's a big responsibility as a bystander. And bystanders also don't want to appear to be interfering or being the killjoy or whatever that might be. But it's a big responsibility in this. And it comes right back to where I was saying, so many people turn to their colleagues to go, do you think that's okay? What would you do? And if that colleague goes, oh, say nothing else, you're going to have a problem.
Yeah.
That's your counsel, isn't it?
And it is quite scary, isn't it? Because I think back to some big scandals that may have happened, or some big crises where people have lost lives because, some kind of negligence, as an example, that somebody just didn't speak up about. And, why wouldn't we want to create a culture where people understand and can challenge? And I guess there are now some laws. So particularly here in the UK, we have whistleblowing laws to protect people that speak up about things, particularly if there's a public interest in it and, these kind of things. And most organizations have similar rules that protect people in their policies. They're just not widely known, or they're just not used, or they're not enacted in the right way. And you just think it's such a shame.
But it's back to the rules and the policies are the structure.
Yeah.
But we have to surround that with the behaviour and the learning. And if people, you could tell me that I have to lie in the road and make it law. But if I am not taught the behaviour of why it's essential I lie in the road and what's the consequence if I don't or I do, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
Because that's, we're not natural rule followers. We have to understand the why.
Yeah, because our brains, that's just the way our brains work,
Absolutely.
right? We have to do that kind of stuff. Okay. And I guess, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, so let's just pick up on that as well. Speak Up isn't just, again, about this negative stuff or avoiding crises. It is actually, Speak Up as a tool for an organization can be hugely beneficial
Absolutely.
when it comes to things like innovation, ideas, challenge, credibility, all of these kind of things things, risk, can be a huge benefit to a business. And, part of the reason why we measure it in our audits is because it can be a huge financial leverage as well as a cultural leverage for an organization if it's done really well as well.
Absolutely that. Yeah. Huge.
And I just love that. We've seen, haven't we, teams that have kind of just flown after we put in place a process where we're training people and then encouraging them to adopt the speak up culture within their organizations. And then suddenly all these ideas start coming, and then all of this, before you know it, the team's flying in terms of performance because everybody's coming forward and is confident about that kind of stuff. It's massive.
Exactly.
Yeah, love that. Okay, so let's do the so what then. What should or could organizations do to kind of promote or encourage people to lean into a speak up process? What's the kind of hard yards we should be thinking about as leaders?
So the first thing is be really clear what is and isn't acceptable. Put some clear standards in place. I always talk about the 1 to 10 scale.
Yeah.
What is normal around here? What starts to become unlawful? And what do I really need to know about?
Yeah.
And really embed that. The second point is to have multiple opportunities for people to speak up. Now, I'm not saying multiple speak up channels. I'm saying multiple layers of trusted individuals that they can speak up to, all of which will filter into the one channel.
Yeah.
So that means educating every one of our colleagues at how to be a good colleague, how to access these systems, remove the mystery. And the people on the receiving end of this information, whether it be through an email or a phone, are also listening, and that they are not biased as to what they believe is and isn't okay. They follow the very robust standard guidelines that they've got. And they're not telling people, oh, well, that's how it is round here, suck it up.
Yeah.
They are taking every complaint seriously. And if you look at some of those very difficult cases you've mentioned today, this is where they've fallen down.
Yeah.
So organisations need to be auditing themselves, as you've said, checking out the process, but also following the threads.
Yeah.
So we would want to see an uplift in cases once all of these things have been embedded in the short term.
Of course.
And that means every leader, every manager, every colleague being taught in that golden minute.
Yeah.
We describe it as that golden minute. Craig, I need to talk to you. I'm feeling really threatened. This has happened today. What do I do?
Yeah.
And you know exactly, without thinking, what to do.
Yeah.
Thank you for telling me. Are you safe? This is what we're going to do together. And those are very simple guidelines I'd recommend.
I mean, there's so much in there for me to kind of pick up on, but so I think the first bit around standards is a really good one for me. So that kind of behavioural standard code. I like to use the term behavioural code. We use the 10-point scale thing, don't we, to help people understand severity and stuff as well. But I like, I go into so many organisations and go, oh yeah, we've got a code of conduct. And then I go and have a look at it and it's 16 pages long. And I think, who's reading that, right? No one's reading that when they join your organisation. What you want is a poster or a little card that can go on the back of your lanyard that tells people in 5 simple steps what our behavior code is. What's the really simple things that I need to know about behavior in this organization? And it should apply not just to your employees, but it should apply to your visitors, to any subcontractors you use, to any, temporary people coming into your premises, your customers, all of that kind of stuff. It needs to be consistent across the lot. So the simple standard stuff, love the point you made about that. And then I guess it's then about promoting that, right? And it isn't just about saying, okay, so here's the behavior code, let's campaign that across the business. You then have to do the bit about helping people understand if you do speak up about anything that falls below these behavioral standards, here's what happens when you do, right? So if you phone this number, you're going to speak to this person, and then that will happen, and then that will happen, and here's what you should expect by when. If you email this line, this will happen, and this will happen, and here's what you should expect by when. So there's that kind of real clarity for people on what will happen when I do that, if I speak up. And actually, incentivize it or reward people. So because Craig spoke up about this last week, we've been able to fix this. Well done. Thanks, Craig. Or if Craig's complaining about a behavior in the first instance, and I'm talking to my line manager, the first thing your line manager should say is, thanks for bringing this to my attention. Right? Say thank you, because it would have taken a lot of courage for Craig to step up and say something often, particularly if Craig's not in a leadership position. That can be really brave for them to put their head above the parapet. So I will always start with those kind of basics. Make sure you say thank you for people. And then also reassure them that, if you do speak up, you're going to be protected and you're going to be okay, and we'll look after you, because actually we encourage people to speak up. Sometimes when people speak up, they're going to get it wrong. Right? And that's okay too. You can get it wrong, because there are people who will abuse a speak up process.
Yeah.
Tough conversation coming up. People do it, right? So they would go, I'm putting a complaint in or a grievance in about Dawn because, she's basically bullying me. Is she bullying you, or is she managing you, Craig? Is she robustly managing your performance, right? There is a very big difference between the two. So being really clear on what robust management looks like is equally as important. But equally, if Craig then complains about and is found that Dawn wasn't bullying Craig, she was just robustly managing him, we then need to say to Craig, please don't do that again. It was inappropriate. Nothing was found. And if you do it again, you will be in trouble if you're complaining about something that's found not to be there. So there's a quid pro quo bit in there for me in that. The reason that's important is because if we don't support managers in that, they will stop managing performance. Yes. And we don't want that either, right? So we've got to be really clear that sometimes people will abuse the system. And therefore, we need to support managers through any complaints or grievances that are made about them as a result of that. But actually, that shouldn't be a deterrent for people using the speak up process as well. And actually be transparent. So we've had 4 complaints this month, 3 of which were upheld and have now been dealt with. Thanks very much, everybody, for raising those complaints to us. It was really helpful. We've really been able to improve our systems as a result of that. And one of the cases were found to not be accurate. And therefore, we thank you for coming forward anyway, but we won't be taking it any further. That's a really good way of promoting the fact that you're speaking, we're listening, we're grateful, thank you. And it's massively powerful in an organization, isn't it?
Love that. Absolutely.
Cool. Okay. Anything else you want to add to help employers navigate this topic around speak up?
Just please don't ignore it. Don't think it's a thing of the past. Don't think that it doesn't exist, because it does. And be a responsible employer that's looking proactively at this.
Yeah. And lean into the benefits you'll get from having a more confident organization. Absolutely. As a result of that as well, because I think it's a powerful tool for you. I guess the other bit for me then is just to come back to a point you made about the spike, right? So our experience says when you reissue or reestablish a good speak up process, or when you've just done a bit of an audit and you're now talking about speak up, the inevitable thing will happen is people will then go, oh, maybe I'll engage with it, right? Yeah. So you'll see a little spike in complaints, and it might be a big spike, it might be a little spike, but you'll tend to see a spike in complaints. Don't be afraid of that, right? That's your opportunity to reassure the business and your employees, it's okay. Well done. Yeah. Thanks for raising it to us. And that comes back to my point at the end then that I just said, we had 3 complaints last week, blah, blah, blah. That's really quite powerful for an organization to see. So lean into the spike, be prepared for it. It's happy. What would be concerning is if it didn't then taper off again quite quickly, right? So, I would only be concerned if it spiked and stayed up there. That's when
spiking.
Or keeps spiking, keeps going up, and up. So if it spikes and then it starts to taper, as expected, that's okay. Just be comfortable with that. Just expect it, so you don't suddenly get a panic when you see the spike. But go with it, lean into it, because actually, once you've done it, the culture will improve. The team will lean into your processes, and it'll be worth it in the end.
Yeah, Absolutely.
Fair assessment. Okay. All right. Should we do listeners' questions? Shall we? So this is the point in the show. If you haven't been listening to us before, where have you been? But if you have, then you'll know this is the point. We give you the microphone and we hand over to questions or comments from listeners as well. We don't get sight of them beforehand. So our fabulous assistant, Lewis, is going to bring in the questions for us in a second in an envelope. So they're unsighted and answered uncensored as well as a result of that. So how good is that? Thank you very much. Very kind. So I got them again. Let's do it. Okay. Oh, we've got quite a few this time. Faye here. Does representation matter? Do you believe you can't be what you can't see? Are role modeling initiatives a waste of time? Hello, Faye. I know who Faye is. So, hi, Faye. Thanks for writing in. I think it's the Faye I think it is. It hasn't put the surname on there. But
so read the 3 parts of the question
Okay,
again.
So does representation matter?
Yeah.
Do you believe you can't be what you can't see? That's a phrase that people use, isn't it? And then are role modeling initiatives a waste of time?
It's an interesting one. I guess it comes
We
back...
have talked about this on a previous episode, I think. So it's probably a question on the back of a previous episode that we've talked about representation.
Yeah. I mean, it comes back to, for me, being the best colleague, the best for the role that you can be, and whatever representation you are, you will contribute something different, would be my approach. So I think there's a piece around wanting to see something that looks like you.
Yeah.
And that gives you the confidence to aspire. I think there's...
So I would agree. I think representation does matter. I think it's important. And I've said this in previous episodes. Had I have had more representation as a child growing up of people from an LGBT background, maybe my coming out experience might have happened sooner. Maybe my life would have been different. I don't know those things, but I think it would have made a difference to my childhood for sure. So I think representation does matter, whether it's in the community or in the workplace. I think it matters. How you get the representation also matters. That's the bit that concerns me, because many organizations are trying to get the representation through arbitrary or inappropriate means. And that doesn't work, because what you do there is you damage the representation. So you damage its impact, you damage its credibility. So representation matters, Faye, but I think it's about how you get the representation also matters. So it's an answer, but a non-answer, I think, is what we're saying. And the role modeling bit, no, I don't think they're a waste of time. I'm a big fan of mentoring, and I think that's a great way for role modeling, because you get mentors to pair up, whether that's normal mentoring or reverse mentoring programs, for example. They're a really good opportunity to explore role modeling and to explore kind of experience and behaviors and stuff. So I don't think they're inappropriate. I guess there are some that are less effective or less impactful than others.
I think it comes back to the behavioural charter of the individual, and I agree with everything that you're saying, but equally I know role models that represent different characteristics that their behaviour is appalling. So again, you've got to have both.
Yeah. And I guess just to end on this one, because I think it's funny, do you believe you can't be what you can't see? No, I don't believe that. I think everybody can just be themselves. There you go. How sweet is that? We should just end there. That was too cute, wasn't it, to go on anymore? Okay. What's this one then? So, in your opinion, how has the conversation around diversity and inclusion evolved in recent years, and where do you see it heading in the future? And that was from Oliver in Dundee. We've kind of done that to death recently, haven't we? So, Oliver, thank you for your question, but I would suggest you go back and have a listen to the back catalogue, because we've covered
Oliver.
it, and nobody talks about impact. They should. Everybody talks about quotas. They shouldn't. That's going to continue probably for a few more months until Dawn and I make sure that the whole world starts talking about impact. There you go. Okay, let's have a look. How can we encourage people to come forward to report poor behaviours? Many fear for their jobs. We've talked about that already. We Getting these around, people getting ahead of us today. And then the final one. Oh, this is interesting. Do you think there'll be a new name for DEI in the future? Right. And that was from Helen. So interestingly, I've seen a couple of things recently about that somebody's trying to rename it MEI. Now I'm going to get this wrong, I'm sure. Meritocracy, evidence, maybe? Yeah. Meritocracy, evidence, and integrity, or something like that. Oh, I can't remember what it was now. MEI, I'm not sure it's going to stick. I can't even remember it.
I've seen loads of different potential acronyms. My advice is always keep this stuff simple.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking about a culture. We're talking about
inclusion,
an inclusive culture.
Yeah, there's nothing more rocket science than that. We should just keep it really simple and stick to inclusion. Yeah, with you on that. Okay, that's it for listeners' questions then this week. So if you do have a question or a comment for us in future episodes, you can get in touch by using our new email address, podcast@metimer.global, or into our new WhatsApp address. And you can WhatsApp message us or WhatsApp voice note us. It's 07482 974 726. Or if you're messaging from outside of the UK, add +44 7482 974 726. We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so coming up to the end of the episode now, it is our recurring feature, woke or joke, and it's my turn.
Oh, goodness, right.
I'm usually a bit rubbish at this, so let's give it a go. So is it true then, Dawn? So is it woke or is it joke that a millionaire businessman has won a battle to fly a woke-free zone flag outside his company headquarters after it was originally pulled down by council officials? Is it woke or is it joke?
God. It can't possibly, but it's so random it might just be. But I'm going to say it's a joke.
Yes! It's true! Yes! It is woke. I love it. It is absolutely true. And this was sports gear tycoon Alex Loven in Wales, actually. So he put a flag up outside his business that said woke free zone. It got taken down by councils after a complaint. He then applied for planning permission for it and got it. And it's flying above his headquarters as we speak. Finally, a point on the board.
I love that.
Love that. Okay. Well, that's it for another episode. It's been lovely to see you again.
And you.
Oh, well, listen, thank you very much for listening to You Must Be Woken. We hope, if anything, you've taken at least one golden nugget away from what we've had to say today. And if we have, then we've done our job properly. So thank you very much for joining us. And bye from me.
And bye from me.
This episode is brought to you by Metimer, the online platform that measures inclusion. The Metimer platform moves beyond the DEI initiatives and allows businesses to measure the real-time impact on culture as well as their financial impact on their bottom line. The Metimer platform is a collaboration between data scientists, digital experts, and cultural change experts to bring substance to the topic of diversity and inclusion in the workplace. It's time for businesses to move past diversity quotas and start understanding the real impact and opportunities of an inclusive culture. To find out more, visit www.metimer.global.